Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the 2014 Retina MacBook Pro and see how these particular MacBooks hold up in 2025. Now, the big thing to keep in mind here for the most part is that with these types of MacBooks, they are still very, very good. They were very good for a while, but because they're 11 years old now, they may not be necessarily the first MacBooks that I'd recommend people to buy anymore, as you can imagine. But here's the very big thing to keep in mind. What's interesting is that even this 11-year-old MacBook still is actually not like a super terrible, outdated MacBook by any means. But also the cool thing is within these types of Macs, I think overall Apple did like a good job with these types of Macs when they originally came out. And, this was actually the first MacBook that I had ever bought and used. So this was the first MacBook I think I bought in 2016 I think it was 2016. This was the first MacBook I bought and used, and I actually had a really good time with it. And since then, I've been using a MacBook as my everyday device. So, Apple did something really right for this MacBook for me to still use it to this day. Not this exact one, but just for me to switch over from Windows PCs. And I think, getting a MacBook is a very good idea. I just don't know if getting this MacBook is the best idea. But let's go and see how it holds up. If you want to go ahead and pick up this Mac or maybe some other Macs that I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description below. You can get that from there, and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of this particular MacBook. When you take a look at the exterior, there's a few big things to kind of keep in mind here. Number one, within this type of Mac, this was one of those types of Macs that basically came out and it's essentially going to be able to give you a good, decent, type of build quality. That's the best thing about these types of Macs when they kind of come down to it. These Macs give you a really good type of experience, and I think that is in and of itself one of those really nice things to keep in mind here within this type of device. This is going to be one of those types of Macs that you can buy and still get a really good experience and a really good time with it. So it's not really going to be like a super outdated type of machine, but it still is going to be giving you a good, powerful type of device when it comes down to it from that side. So the build quality is still very good. You're getting that, aluminum build all throughout, which is amazing. You're also going to be able to go through and get the, standard type of layout around it. So it's just going to be giving you the standard type of, build quality that's still there on most MacBooks. The interesting thing though here for this type of MacBook though is the port selection. So this was always something that I really did like about these types of MacBooks. You were able to essentially go through and get your two Thunderbolt 2 ports. You were able to get some USB Type A ports. You were also able to go through and get a SD card slot and an HDMI port inside as well. So that was something that was so cool to have inside of these types of Macs, because you were able to go through and get a Mac that was going to be giving you a really good type of experience from that side. It wasn't really going to be super outdated. It was going to be pretty good. And I do think from that side, that in and of itself was something that was super cool to have. So I think from the port selection alone, that was a really cool advantage. And that is kind of a really cool thing going on here. If you're going to go through and pick up a Mac, this is actually something that's really awesome. And like I said, I was a massive fan of this type of Mac when it came down to it from that side. So, and it's funny because even after a few years after this Mac came out, Apple went through, they, eventually removed all the ports and everything like that, the version after this type of Mac, but then they ended up kind of giving us a way better type of experience, after the fact a little bit later. So I felt like this Mac, even though it wasn't necessarily like the best Mac of all time, this thing was still a very good MacBook when it first came out, because it gave you that type of experience at that moment, which was actually something that was really cool. On the bottom, you don't really get anything else, but when you flip this thing open, this was another cool advantage for this type of Mac when it came down to it as well. So this was something that was actually very surprising. So what Apple ended up doing here for this type of Mac was that they actually ended up giving us another really cool thing inside of it. They basically gave us the capability of kind of getting a Mac that was going to be able to give us a little bit of a better type of experience. So within this type of Mac, they basically went through and gave us this super nice keyboard. It was full sized, it was amazing. You had the trackpad underneath it as well, which was another really cool advantage. And that right there is another one of these really cool things that you can basically go through and get your hands on as well. Because this type of Mac did give you like a really good type of experience from that particular perspective. So again, it wasn't perfect, but it did kind of give you a good type of experience and a good type of design overall. And I do think that is in and of itself another nice advantage for the 2014 MacBook, Pro, because it just felt so good. And then you also had the display inside of it as well. And this was another one of those really cool things to kind of keep in mind here as well. Within this type of display, these displays, the 13-inch and the 15-inch, were really good displays. this is probably one of the best advantages for these types of Macs, is to be able to go through and get a device panel like this, because it still is going to be like a very, very good type of display for how old this phone, this MacBook is, right? It's 11 years old, so this thing does actually look pretty good. Also, when you look at it from that side and you think about it from a price tag standpoint, I've personally had like PCs that have, had not as good of displays as this thing. Even some portable gaming consoles, even some phones, right, haven't really had as good of a display as this particular device. And I will tell you from that side, that is kind of a crazy thing to kind of keep in mind there from that particular perspective. And I do think if you are about to go through and pick up a device, this is a really cool thing to keep in mind here. So again, it isn't necessarily like the biggest, most perfect deal in the world, but if you are about to go through and like pick up a device, I do think that is a really cool thing to keep in mind here. But beyond that, this MacBook isn't necessarily perfect, and there are some caveats to this type of device when it comes down to it. Now, number one of the biggest things to keep in mind here within this type of Mac is that it's pretty much completely outdated with software. So I would hate to recommend a MacBook to people if it's already kind of outdated, and this thing is not kind of outdated. This thing is very outdated. So I, for one, would not recommend anyone to buy this type of MacBook anymore, because it's not really getting any more software updates. Now, if you're working on a project or you need some like sort of crazy side device, and you don't really care if it's supported with software or not, then maybe you'll be okay with this thing. But I will tell you that for the most part, if you are running a MacBook that is going to be giving you a better type of experience, there are better options out there for you. And this one just doesn't really make a lot of sense for me to recommend to anybody for that matter. So from that side alone, I do think there are some better options out there. And that's why I would probably recommend to go through and buy a Mac that is giving you a better experience, like much rather than this thing. So I will tell you from that side as well, that is kind of one of those big things to keep in mind there too. On top of that, the performance of this thing, for when it first came out with this Intel chipset, it was probably okay and good enough, but it really isn't that good anymore. And it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to buy this Mac from a performance perspective from that side, right? I do think there are better types of Macs to go and buy from that particular perspective. And for this one, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to go and buy anymore from that particular site either. So like I said, this thing isn't necessarily, the most perfect thing in the world anymore, but there are some better options out there for the most part. And that's just kind of how I see this type of Mac holding up from that particular side as well. So overall, when I look at this particular type of Mac, I just don't really think this is one of those types of Macs that I would recommend, every single person to buy. I think there are some better options out there for the most part. And I do think if you are about to go through and pick up a Mac, this isn't really the one I would recommend buying, right? I think there are some way better options out there for the most part. And when it comes down to it, I would probably tell you to go ahead and buy something like a maybe like an M1 MacBook Pro. An M1 MacBook Pro is probably the lowest one I'd recommend buying. If you really want a good one, an M1 Pro MacBook Pro for that price, I think is very solid. That's the exact one I'm using. But currently, I probably would not recommend buying this type of MacBook anymore. I think it was good when it first came out, but it just generally would not be one I would recommend buying anymore. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.